So I'm gonna call the meeting of the Springfield Budget Committee to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Counselor Weber. Counselor Moe.
Here.
Counselor Rodley.
Here.
Rockwell. Here. Counselor Doyle. Counselor Stout.
Here.
Jason Miller.
Here.
Devin Marche Duncan.
Here.
Michael Roman.
Here.
Ruth Linos.
Here.
Arthur Ayer.
Here.
And Bob Brew.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
So there's one time this evening designated for public testimony and will be listed as business from the audience on the agenda. If you are attending in person, please complete the request to speak card located near the entrance of the library meeting room and give them to staff. If you are joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak during that time, please use the raise hand option to be called upon to provide comment when the designated time is announced. The order of public testimony is as follows. 1, anyone who is in person at City Hall. 2, anyone who has raised their virtual hand. 3, anyone who has submitted email in advance. And 4, anyone who has submitted written comment via mail in advance. So next, we're moving on to the business from the audience. Has staff received any requests to speak cards, or are there any members online that have their virtual hand raised?
There are no requests to speak cards received, and I'm giving it just a quick second on raised hands. I see no raised hands.
Then we'll move on to point 3. It looks like this is the budget deliberation, questions and discussions. So are there any questions or topics for discussion regarding the proposed budget?
Expecting some from you, Arthur.
So I have some general questions. If you happen to have the budget document in front of you, on page 57, it lists various fund sources, and there is a category 49 other financing sources, which tends to be in some parts of the budget, very large source of revenue. And yet it seems to be another category, and I'm curious what is in other financing sources. Category 49 on page 57. Oh, okay, so I'm looking at a different, maybe I'm looking at a different year's budget. I don't think so.
Arthur, is that like the PDF page 57? I'm wondering if we had an error.
I think I might have put down the PDF 57. I'm sorry.
No, it should be the same, but we obviously made a technical glitch.
You are correct. Yeah. It's the PDF page 57 is actually page 43.
I thought we had that fixed. My apologies.
So without digging deeper, if you have access to board, but I think you probably have interfund transfers in there.
It's gonna be interfund transfers, beginning cash. I can pull up the rest.
Okay. And I think those are two actually going to be the largest. So beginning cash is, is how we carry that forward each year. It's your equity. And then interfund transfers are, one of the graphs the other day, I showed like it's around $16 million that's getting transferred between funds. It's not money leaving the organization.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you. Another question I had was, when we look at some of these programs, when you look at the expenditures versus the revenues, you see a difference. And I'm thinking of the graphs that show the reserves on the bottom in gray and then the green and the red lines. And intuitively, I would assume that the difference between the red and the green line is going to translate directly and exactly to the reserve, but it doesn't. The change in the reserve.
Yeah, intuitively, it should. Is there one that you can specifically point out?
Might be able to All right, great.
The only thing that I can say is sometimes when we look at revenues and expenditures, we'll leave transfers in and out excluded from that. So there is the possibility that there's some non-departmental type expenditures that aren't being captured in that, because a lot of times in those charts, we want to show the operating picture.
Well, the transient lodging tax reserves went down substantially, even though the revenue was well above the expenditures. That's probably a transfer.
Yes, and that one, we do have a transfer out, 5/9, 55% to the general fund. Looking at that, I think that's exactly what it is.
Okay. And the other question I had was, where are the reserves invested? Is that mandated by the state? Are they invested locally?
So we have an investment policy, which dictates how we can invest, and we're on an 18-month time frame. And one of the investment tools we also have is the local government investment pool, which actually has been providing us with best return.
Right.
And so we tend to maximize that. And we actually have two government investment pools. We have one for WMC and one for the city. I think right now, the cap on that is around 60 million for each, so it's about 120 million. Otherwise, I'm mostly investing in US Treasuries, just with a lot of the uncertainty out there, for the basic point difference that I can get investing in banks or other types of securities. I've liked the security of the US Treasuries.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was any local economic stimulus that was being provided by the reserves. Which sounds like.
To some degree, we do invest in some local bank purchase CDs. We have an investment with Banner Bank, Summit Bank, and Alpha Bank. So we do have that in mind, and also partially, we don't tend to get as good returns when we go with the local bank. But it's twofold, because when there's also borrowing opportunities, or we have, sort of creative projects that we're working on, that's a part of banks that, so, right, it kind of serves that double purpose.
Yeah, establish that relationship.
Yep.
Yep. Okay.
Since we're on investing, does the city of Springfield have thoughts on Bitcoin?
That is not in our investment policy, so no thoughts on that.
Okay. No thoughts, like you look at it, you just think it's.
If it's not in the investment policy, it would be kind of wasted thinking. If we wanted to modify our investment policy, that's something we can look at, but just given the sort of standards or the, expectations for government in terms of how they invest, I think that's still kind of considered a non-traditional investment vehicle. So it's just not something we've considered. I think if we were to go in that direction, that would be a council conversation.
See in the news a lot about different states are starting, so I guess we'd look down the road that then counties and cities would follow if it were to happen, I'm guessing.
Any change we make to our investment policy, we have to run through the Oregon State Treasury, and they have to approve that.
Great.
On page 110, and this truly is page 110. This is the city manager office performance measures. Performance measure number 2, I'm sorry. Yes, I am focusing on number 2. The number of leases updated each year. The target for this coming fiscal year is 75%, but the actual estimated is 20%. Is 75% really reasonable? It seems like maybe that's shooting too high. Is that aspirational?
Yeah, I'm gonna look at, do you want to come up, Ally?
Thank you. Thank you.
So the question is, on the performance measures for the city manager's office, the target for updating city leases is 75% of the leases being updated in fiscal year 26, but the actual for fiscal 25 is estimated at 20%, which seems like a big difference. So I'm just wondering why the optimism about doing so many this coming fiscal year.
Sure. I think the optimism came from onboarding the city's property management company. Last year, we entered a contract with Campbell Commercial Real Estate to not only update our leases, but also just enforce the leases we have in a more professional manner. In navigating a lot of the setup of that contract, it takes a lot of legwork to make sure that everything gets transferred over properly. So I think we were probably a bit optimistic with the quantity of work we could take on in that first year. Luckily, we have Campbell Commercial through the end of fiscal year 27 to focus on updating leases.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Ellie's here. If anyone has any questions on economic development, legislative questions, she'd be the person.
On that same topic, other than Booth County, what other pieces does the city hold?
Sure. The city also leases the Springfield Depot building, which is at, I think 110 South A Street. The Chamber of Commerce is the user of that building. And then the Springfield Economic Development Agency is pursuing a lease for 2 of its properties as well.
I have one on economic development. I liked what Nathan, or maybe it was Nancy, last night said that part of our position here, you know, part of it is to do what Arthur does so well and go through the budget and discuss that. But another part of it is for us to be kind of PR from the city out to our own personal communities. And I know that I know a lot of people interested in the Glenwood development, but it seems as big developments go and acquiring properties and all that and getting ducks in order, it takes a long time. I just don't know how far out we are till we start seeing some awesome things happening.
Yeah, that's a tough time frame to put a finger on. Right now, the CETA board is in a stage of the process called the entitlement process. A lot of land use, a lot of contracting, a lot of property negotiations between landowner partners. Right now, that the scheduled time frame to complete that work is July of next year. After that work's completed, we can start to focus on engineering and construction of infrastructure, the wood service site. So right now, that's the timeframe that I'm comfortable speaking in. A lot can change as paperwork's getting done, and as we prep for that next stage of the development process.
So you think like 2027, you'd start to see bulldozers and things?
Oh gosh, you're really pressing me here. You know,
Not until 2027.
Yeah, I think we have at least another year of that entitlement work before we can start to think about a construction schedule. Yeah.
And Ally will be giving a presentation on the Riverville District tomorrow evening.
The annexations for the properties just got them. Is close to done, right?
They
It
will
was
be
working, so-
effective here at the end of May.
It's on page 16 with the projection of our population compared to Lane County and Oregon. It stops at 2024, but as we're seeing our numbers bigger than Lane, how do we compare to Eugene in population percentage? And wondering if part of that anticipated growth is triggering some of our infrastructure decisions in order to be ready for that population growth.
Yeah.
It's a more philosophical.
You know, as far as Eugene goes, I think they're about 2.5 times our size. So we just didn't think of including it in this chart. 24 is the last year that we had information. In terms of anticipating that growth, That'd be a question, I think, for community development. We could bring up Jeff Pascal, if you feel comfortable speaking to that.
So population growth?
Just what we're anticipating and how we're preparing for that. Structure wise, is that what you're
Yeah.
asking?
And for the property taxes that'll come potentially with development for that.
For property tax projections, typically we look at our historical trends, and we've been averaging about 3.3 to 3.4% growth, and that encompasses not only that 3% collar, but also the growth we've experienced in our community. Any given year, we could see a larger or smaller growth, but on average, if we look at a decade, it's been 3.3. So that captures the growth piece, and we have no reason to think that that's gonna change anytime in the future. So that's kind of what, in looking at that sort of growth and increment, that would capture that.
Okay, and so with yesterday's conversation about, we know we've got big pieces of property that we're seeing that we can get more revenue potentially if they're subdivided or there's more development on that property that stimulates more revenue, different forms, fees and so on. So that's kind of what I'm speculating is how do you see a programmatic approach to that so that you're growing revenue opportunities with that potential population? Because they're not gonna be in my backyard.
You want to answer that?
Well, I don't know how to answer the revenue piece because that'll come with the growth. I can tell you, I think we are currently getting draft numbers from the state for 26 projections on population. And the draft numbers we're seeing, population growth is expected to slow down as far as what we're seeing from what you've seen in the past. Things that we're doing for community development and working with the council, we recently updated our development code, which allows for smaller lots, so more density. The other thing is just looking at what the state's been doing and how they're directing middle housing and what we've done to update our middle housing code. So we as the city, we're not developers, but basically having our codes in place and ready to go, having our policies such as the high density housing tax exemption in place to kind of incentivize. I think that's what we're doing. On the infrastructure piece, we just adopted, the council just adopted an updated wastewater master plan, which kind of lays out the needed work for the next 20 years. And we're currently working on other areas of priority, which is like Glenwood and things like that.
The reason for my question is Springfield's got the reputation of this is the place to build and grow your business. But it would be lovely to complement that with this is the place to build and live and have your family. Because we've got the for sale sign out. And place to move
So-
in.
If I'm not mistaken, there were some very substantial residential developments north of 126 over the past year or two, seems like.
16.
And I would think that would drive some population growth, maybe above the historical or recent historical trend.
Yeah, I don't know what goes into the state's trend from Portland State. It just showing what they're projecting out for the next 10 years on an annual basis. But that does also not necessarily jive with the numbers of what we're getting from the state on what we're required to build for residential units. Which is we've never hit the target which they're giving us, and I don't know if we can hit the target. But I will tell you from building perspective, we're averaging about 400 building permits a year. So there has been a significant amount of building. There has also been a significant amount of multifamily apartments going in as well.
Thank you.
I've got a question that maybe you can address. In the presentation, you talk about the 42nd Street levee project. Just that with the Army Corps of Engineers, I was wondering if you could speak to just kind of how does that work with the funding? So it sounds like they would cover some of that, and it sounds like massive project potentially. And just kind of been thinking in terms of you know, also what the ice storm did, it just kind of threw everything out of whack with a lot of the budgetary things. Is there potential, like things could be discovered that may have big budgetary implications for future years, or? if you
With
can- the levy.
specific levy.
Yeah,
For funding, it's probably best that either Brian or our emergency manager, who is managing that
Okay,
project.
okay.
And it is a very large, big, complex project, especially with the street project right there.
right,
Stormwater and things like that.
yeah. Speak to that process a little bit.
Before Jeff goes, is there any other community development questions?
Just have a typo, but I can give that to Jeff.
Is there any potential for expanding the, outside the UGB, like bringing some of that more into? To be able to, because I mean, capacity and compaction is really a problem, right? So,
So one of the things that's on our to-do list is to start that housing analysis, the residential buildable lands analysis. And so that would be what, you know, that analysis of what is available within the current UGB, then would lead to that discussion with the council about starting that process of expanding the UGB.
does that
We,
require state approval?
Yeah.
Okay.
so, yeah, that's a long, complex land use process, but the first step is analyzing what we do have available within the UGB, determining if there's a shortage of buildable lands for the next 20 years, and that comes with a lot of this data we're getting of what's the population growth numbers, what's our housing target numbers, and do we even have the acreage to hit those targets?
Yeah, I mean, with the mandates that they're putting on the amount of homes we need to build and,
Yep.
you know, and we're not able to hit it because we, you know, don't have the
So,
capacity.
yeah, if you recall, housing, they're gearing up to start working on that housing work and then following up with that analysis.
Thank you.
So you'll be seeing that soon.
So if the projection for the population decreases, will the state make adjustments to what they're requiring?
I think that, I mean, I
I
think.
know the answer to that.
Yeah,
question.
I don't think so, because I think we're really in a shortage now. It's just maybe the need is not growing as exponentially as it was. It's like we still have a need to satisfy currently. And that's what they're determining on. And then also we'll have to think about what that future growth is and maybe
Your projection, right?
20-year projection.
I've heard a lot of community members talking about permits for ADUs. Does that go towards meeting that goal for the state?
They are, yeah, they don't, ADUs don't count count as, right now. And one thing with the middle housing, and this is something as far as our planning staff that we're talking about, is almost like now that they've added this unit called a cottage cluster, we were kind of, that ADU is kind of that initial cottage cluster. And so having conversations at the next round of code, do we kind of remove the ADU and now that we have this cottage cluster? Or is that still the code we have? Is that still meeting a need in the community?
Where are we in terms of the 20-year supply on commercial and industrial lands?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I know we just completed, our commercial and industrial lands. But we've done a few things. There have been some planning activities, so I think that's all kind of part of that analysis because there have been some lands that have been converted through rezoning and things like that. The other interesting thing is I know if following the state and they're allowing housing, certain middle housing types in commercial. And so that kind of impacts the availability of land if a developer decides to come in and build housing. So those are all kind of those things that are swirling within our planning. They grapple with every day of these competing needs and codes.
So I have a question about the sewer line extension down to Jasper and Natron. So that's outside the city limits, right?
Yeah,
But it's within the UGB?
right.
Okay. And is it normal to extend services before annexing?
That was not typically something that city had done in the past. How we kind of got started down that path was in 2009. We had a mandate to finish what we called wet weather abatement, which was a lot of sewer rehab. And in order to meet the deadlines, we had to sell bonds. And during that time, we also had the Great Recession. One of the benefits to the city was we were seeing really good bidding prices. So what we had estimated was a $20 million need. We actually completed for about 12. And so with that remaining funds from the bond, we also had described in there extending sewer services. And so went to the council at that time and they chose to extend the first phase of Jasper Natron while doing preliminary design on all the phases. And so now we're up to phase 3, which would be extending out to Brandes Road. Brandes Road is where it
Right.
terminate.
Yeah.
So it's just been a direction that the council has taken with the funds in the sewer and using our reserves to extend those trunk lines, because those can be very expensive. And then the developers can just kind of buy into the system as they develop their property or property owners.
And is there a projection as to when that will essentially pay for itself?
I don't have one on paper. I could probably go look at that, but the way we've kind of addressed it with the council is we have another mechanism which developers could use, but we've only had one that's ever been utilized, and that's a reimbursement district. And in essence, they have to get all the property owners and they will end up paying that developer back. The length of time that can be carried is 15 years. And so if on that 16th year, somebody then comes in, the city then collects those funds as in lieu of. And so the reality is the city can carry it in perpetuity because we can collect in lieu of as somebody connects. And so that's been the model. So it could be 45 years from now when all the properties are developed that everybody connects up. But in the meantime, we're also gaining more property tax value by those undeveloped properties developing.
I have 3 small ones. I've noticed, and I'm wondering if this is a general trend across all the departments, there's a decrease in vehicle spending. As we went from like 2 million or so, or we went from a little bit more to, we've cut our vehicle spending on Fund 713 from 2.3 million in Public Works to 906 million. I just kind of would like some context of, are we just trying to cut back on vehicle spending? But I also noticed there's an increase in, community events. I just wonder if you could detail just what's going on with those particular funds within Public Works.
Familiar with the.
We can let Brian,
Yeah.
comes up in the vehicles.
Yeah.
Brian.
As far as like how much the city's spending towards community events.
I'm just curious, like, what's happening in the background? Just choose, just like, what's going on there? What's that about? I want to know, what are the events that we're programming for?
So right now there's a couple that have been happening regularly. We have the parade and we have the downtown block party. Other than that, I think this year they're gonna have it again, which is the cruise. But those are usually private citizen driven, coming in and getting a license. There are funds set aside to help offset some of the costs, but typically in the license, they're required to pay for all extra costs that are provided by the city, such as overtime for traffic control, things like that. Other city other events that are negotiated are like, I know for operations, the traffic control that they provide for the duck games, things like that. So I think Brian could speak to some of those because those are pre-planned and negotiated, similar to like the marathon is pre-planned and negotiated on what they'll pay to the city for the services.
That's awesome. That's all I was wondering. Perfect. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
While he's coming up, I do need to just announce for the record that Councilor Weber and Councilor Doyle have both.
Good evening. I'm Brian Conlon, Operations Director.
Let's go back to Michael's.
So, one of the points that was made, the different slides and in the budget, of course, is the assessment of the 42nd Street levy. And just kind of curious, big picture, one, if you could kind of talk about how that works with the Army Corps of Engineers and the funding, but secondly, does it pose a potential big budget hit, in the next couple of years? Because again, just in mind of with the weather and how much that just really snarl. In it could that potentially be, potential, yeah, so.
So Ken has been the staff lead on this initiative for how many years since we?
10, 15.
10 years,
somewhere in
15
there.
years. And so he'll concisely be able to provide the budgetary, and I have 3 bullets that I've asked Ken to share as well. So should it help answer a few of those things? And there is a budgetary responsibility that we will have. We're currently in the feasibility, doing a 2-year feasibility study where we're about 50% share with the Corps of Engineers. So.
Morning, everyone. I'm Ken Vogany, city's emergency manager, and Brian mentioned the project manager for our 42nd Street levy project. So a couple of quick background pieces if you're not familiar with the levy. It's located on 42nd Street between Marcola Road and just about to the entrance of International Paper. So it's about a mile long. As you're driving on 42nd Street, that berm with the bicycle path on top, that's the 42nd Street levee. It was constructed in 1959 and provides flood protection from the Mackenzie River to roughly a third of Springfield's land area and population. So it is a very important piece of infrastructure for us. We've come to learn over recent years that it does not meet current federal levee standards for being certified as a flood control structure under the National Flood Insurance Program. So working with our congressional delegation, city manager's office, the Water Resources Development Act of 2022 authorized the Corps of Engineers to work with us to develop, let's call it improved flood risk management for the levee. That's the terms that the Corps of Engineers would prefer me to use. So it's actually a congressional authorization for the Corps of Engineers to be working with us. They're doing that under a program that they consider a small cost program, which when we initially signed up was a $10 million cap for the federal. 2 weeks ago, that was increased to a $15 million cap. So the federal share can be 15 million. The cost share is 65% federal, 35% local overall for the project. So for the total, okay? Where we are currently is the first phase. We've entered into an agreement with the Corps of Engineers for what's called the feasibility study, which is basically taking the opportunity to figure out what the issues are. What's a cost-effective way of addressing those issues, and then getting through primarily the environmental permitting and pre-design phase. So we know moving forward, what's that package of work that we're going to do. That should be completed in about 2 years. At that point in time, we'll be back with the city, well, hopefully before that, actually, back with the city council about the alternatives, what direction we're going to go, but also the budget side. So we have within the stormwater reserves and the stormwater capital fund, we already have about $4 million set aside for this project as part of the capital fund and stormwater. So that gives us that opportunity to plan forward for that piece, okay? So as part of the feasibility study, there's also a cost share that we're doing right now. It's a 50-50 cost share. And we are making up a portion of our cost share through what's referred to as work in kind. So we're putting some of the elements of the feasibility study, the city's going to provide the information. And primarily that's a geotechnical study. That's where we're hiring a contractor to go out and actually drill some holes, dig some holes, and find out what's really there underground, so we know what to work with. The plans from 1959 said fill. Okay, that doesn't tell me what we really have. So we're gonna drill some holes and figure that out. The other piece that we're doing under that cost share and work in kind is we're putting together the public engagement plan for this whole feasibility study phase, where we will also be working with the public, informing the community, seeking input on the solutions, et cetera. So
Those are the two pieces that we're providing. Our share on the feasibility study is about 450,000, and we're estimating that we're providing roughly 170,000 of that through the work in kind. And I can talk for hours on the levy.
There will be decisions down the road about construction and the cost of construction once we have an idea of what the design would be.
But just to maybe paraphrase, it sounds like as far as those initial costs, has been provisions for those as far as the phases we know about. And then once we know what needs to be done, then we'll assess what those estimates may be. But right now, it's just
Correct.
don't know. Right.
Correct.
Okay.
We'll come back. The feasibility study will give us basically the boundaries for how much additional budgeting authority that we need.
Does the Army Corps of Engineering give any guidance as to, let's say there's this sum that's estimated, do they also cover like 2/3 or just depends on what needs to be done? Or
The Army Corps of Engineers will cover 65% of the investments we want to do, and I'll just give an example. If we want to work with Willamette Lane to pave the parking lot off of Marcola Road, it's currently gravel. That would be a local cost to absorb. The Corps of Engineers doesn't share on that piece.
Thank you. And it was mentioned, I think, by Jason Miller last night about reserves sizes. And this is an example where potentially we would be diving into reserves to help us with our part of what would be expected in a construction project. It probably wouldn't be $1 million. It's gonna be a chunk, so.
And how did this become a city problem, right? That's
a good question.
So I'll go a little bit more back in history. When the levee was constructed in 1959, the land was owned by Lane County. And they worked with the U.S. Department of Agriculture Soil Conservation Service to build the levee. So that's how it got there. It was under county ownership until I believe 1983, when the county transferred the land for the levee itself to the city of Springfield. And then in the 90s, Weyerhaeuser transferred the wetland area of the Mackenzie River Oxbow. They transferred that land to the city. So all the land between 42nd Street and the river, and depending on how you read the deed, actually across the river, because it used to be over there and now it's over here. Anyway, so the city is responsible, we're the only owner of the levee, the Corps of Engineers. There is no federal involvement at all. So that's why we took the path of working with the congressional delegation, requesting an authorization for the Corps to participate. They're the subject matter experts. So we decided to work with them and see if we could get a successful project. So.
And would you add, if folks are wondering what we're doing in the meantime, we did receive some emergency response training dollars, correct?
Yeah, so we've been doing a number of different things over the years with respect to the levee and planning for that potential. You never know when the river may come into flood stage. In 1964, it almost overtopped during the December of 64 flood. So we have purchased a supply of what we refer to as flood fight materials. We have over 20,000 sandbags, but we have another product that's a temporary flood barrier wall that we can erect over half a mile in a couple of hours with city staff so that we have additional protection there. We also applied for and received grant funding to write an emergency action plan. So it gives us that framework to work with if we think there may be some flooding coming that we need to pay attention to. What are the steps we're going to take to put out public notification and work with our partners to be aware of that and get ready for it. Sure.
I think we don't seem to mention anymore. It was the railroad spur between the Mohawk Valley and to Weyerhaeuser's plant. We always thought of it as the railroad. You mentioned that, but that was an important thing.
It was an important thing. When the levee was constructed, raising the railroad spur that was there, and then on top of that was a double rail spur that was in operation for about 20 years. All of that has been decommissioned and removed, and now we have a multi-use path on top of it.
And just real quick, I assume the right of way was fully vacated in that levee construction.
So it's land that is owned by City of Springfield. So it's not a right of way, it's City of Springfield.
I think with rail.
Oh, the rail spur, yeah.
I think it's good to maybe let people know that if that levee was to break, how far that water would go, because I was pretty shocked when you told us about that. And I think people think, oh, okay, flood, 42nd will be flooded. But when you mentioned Coburg Road, I was like, this is serious, like it's a serious thing, so.
So just the topography of the land, we don't have a good map in here. The topography of the land, the Mackenzie River is higher than the Willamette River. So if the levee were to breach, the water is going to primarily flow west. Some to the north, back into the Mackenzie, but a substantial amount will flow west over to I-5 into what we refer to as the Q Street Channel. It's a drainage channel that runs through mid-Springfield and into Eugene under I-5 over to Alton Baker Park. And so that's where the discharge for most of that floodwater is, okay? That levee and that channel were built as part of the same package of projects that was done in the 50s. It's all part of a joint project and deal there. Majority of Springfield will have, the affected area is less than 2 feet of inundation. So it's not major flooding, but it will have major disruption through the community. So if you roughly think from Centennial north and from 42nd Street to I-5, that's the area that gets impacted should we have a levee failure during a large flood event.
And so I don't know if you can answer this exactly, but if the levee doesn't live up to FEMA standards, at what point does that, 1/3 of Springfield become in a flood zone and require flood insurance?
So if the city were to opt to not make improvements to the levee under the National Flood Insurance Program as it sits there today, it won't meet the standards to be able to be accredited as a flood control structure. So all the land that I just described could become designated as floodplain under the National Flood Insurance Program, which also makes it then subject to some environmental regulations, such as it all becomes salmon habitat. And a number of other things. But it's roughly 7,000 properties that are protected from flooding by the levee. So there's a huge economic impact to us if we were to not pursue trying to find some options.
I just want to make one quick comment about that. When, we live in a kind of a time where people are concerned about affordability, right? Housing costs, and our work around the levee is like a really tangible example of how, the city continues to work to make sure people are safe in their homes, but also that you can find housing at an affordable rate. Because if we were on flood insurance, people would notice.
We could, address your suggestion, craft some new information, especially since we found some of this out within the last year in terms of getting information out to the public.
That's part of the public engagement plan that we're putting together, is to help inform the community about the protections that they're receiving from the levee and what some of the outcomes might be if we didn't take this path.
So the question I have is, city just completed a beautiful repaving of that 42nd Street, and will this levee improvement affect that at all?
So I could defer this one back to Jeff, but I'll take a little piece of it. The overlay project that we did on 42nd Street was considered approximately a 10-year or temporary fix while we work through what the design for the future improvements of 42nd Street are and the levee. So it was to give us something that we could work with for a while as we get all of these other things figured out. The goal for the levee project is what our primary thing we need to do is raise the levee height. We're not anticipating needing to move to the west at all with the levee structure. But the design for what the future improvement of 42nd Street looks like hasn't come together yet. We haven't done that.
Is there any work around the Cascadia potential, like planning for that along with the levee? Because I'm assuming if Cascadia happened, it would significantly, it may impact that. I could be wrong, but it would seem.
That's another one of the reasons for doing our geotechnical analysis, drilling some holes 30 feet deep so we can see what's really down there. Some of the mapping we have indicates that the soil under the levee foundation may be highly liquefiable in an earthquake. So if it is, can we stabilize that as part of this project? So that's part of what we're going to be looking at. If no other questions for me, I'll slip back there and let you have it have Brian go.
Anything street related for Brian?
I just had a question about your vehicle spend this year is much lower than previous years. Can you just tell us about that?
Yes, well, thinking about that a little bit while Ken was talking. If we go back 15 years, we were deferring purchasing for a period of time. Our fund 713 had built up pretty well, but our vehicles were lasting longer than we had anticipated. And so it was a decision by the city manager's office, Gino at that time, as the city manager, is to defer, and we did for about 7 years. So that impacted us to purchase more equipment over the last 5 years. In fact, we've spent approximately $3 million on rebuilding our fleet. And that includes not just operations, but DPW, other divisions, Jeff's and Matt's divisions, and reach out to fire as well a little bit on some of the fire vehicles. And so right now we're not necessarily in a pause, but we've replaced fleet and we're going to try to manage the fleet so we're not purchasing all at once. We get back to this more equal expenditure in revenue in balancing as well.
It's great work. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a little levity. On page 118, this is fiscal year 26 initiatives, Operations Division, Street and Right-of-Way Management. It says complete half-mile of thin lift overlays on unapproved roads. Really? Unapproved?
Unimproved, doesn't say unapproved.
It does say unapproved.
Somebody. So what was that?
118.
118.
That's probably me.
Is there anything Arthur can't catch?
Yeah.
Those numbers and we're.
Well, they are unapproved, unapproved or unapproved. We actually do thin lift overlays, though. It's interesting conversation because one of the arguments was not to do thin lifts for a long time on those types. So the council took that position in 2007, went to the council and made an argument. Bob Bruce might remember this, where we had indicated that they pay the same amount of money at the pump for the local fuel tax, which was implemented in 2003. And the council bought off on that and thought, yeah, those unimproved roads, as long as we can, we're not going to undertake something that's a huge at a time. But Ben also, as the surface manager, is performing those on improved roads as well. Just need more money. the chronic money problem.
Now, I know you've done slurry seal on a number of roads. Has there been any thought about chip seal?
Yeah, we've thought about it. There's actually sealants such as chip seal. So chip seal is a larger granular of aggregate, usually about 1/4 of an inch to 3/8 of an inch. And they'll use polymer sealant mixed with it. And the county does a lot of their roadways with chip seals, and they're successful. They'll extend wear life for depending on speed on the surface for 5 to 7 years. And the county has a big program doing that. Ben has been interested in looking at that on our improved streets and then adding a thinner seal coat over the top of that. They call them Sammies. So basically like a sandwich. And so, but it gets close to the work that we can do with thin lift overlay. But that's a struggle as well because we're prohibited by sort of self-imposed, but actually Jeff could speak to this well, was the American with Disabilities Act requires that when we undertake more rehabilitation type work, that the pedestrian crossings need to be upgraded. And sometimes that work exceeds the amount of money that it costs us to put a new level on of asphalt.
Yeah. So in your presentation, you made a comment, something along the lines of the large staff that over half, I think, have like 3 years of experience or less. So I'm just curious, is that something, just facing a city, public works kind of on the whole as people kind of roll and moving, that type of dynamic of training and just kind of bringing in new people? And then what kind of impact does that have on the budget? Just maybe having folks that are younger and having to train, maybe having to, I don't know, maybe redo things at times or have you.
Super great question. I'll give you an example. For years, we had really small amount of turnover, maybe 3 or 4 people per year, but we've had, we've seen 60% of our employees move on to retirement or just move on. And there's a huge cost in meeting the DOT responsibilities for our licensing, driver's license, Class A, Class B licensing. And at one point in time, just to get one person up to speed with the training that was required, it was about $8,000 per driver. What was going on with that is some of them would get poached. We'd go through the training and then someone would make a pretty good offer, like a 6-figure job. You can do long haul work, and we'd lose people. Jane Hertz, our HR director, was going to help us, try to build a policy around, you come on as an employee. If you leave early, we're going to try and collect back from you on that. But the training program, if you'll notice in the budget this year, Tanya Kling, who isn't here tonight, and I need to recognize her. In fact, it's a big budget, the operations division budget, and she leads the way on that. Lost my track. I shouldn't have mentioned Tanya. What was your question?
So yeah, just what kind of impact does it have in training up folks and getting them up to speed, especially such a large percentage of your team?
So we have a program created that we've now decided that we had our programs had separate employee development line items in each one of them. And we thought it was difficult for you as a budget committee and the council to understand how much we are spending on training. So we've combined the development and training budgetary items into one program area for the most part. Not GIS is yet to be included, but it's steep. There's steep cost in retraining, and then to dovetail with that, we decided to go away from the apprenticeship program we had through BOLI and start working back towards the APWA, which is American Public Works Association trainings. And they have great education programs. And in fact, we'll have opportunities for some of our staff to be trainers that actually go to the conferences and put on programs. So to get at how much it costs, we could come up with a number and tell you what we paid over the last probably 3 budget cycles or so, but it's a significant amount. And that statement about 3 years or less, it might be less than that now. What we're finding is people will come on, younger workers, and they lose their interest a little more quickly, or just haven't decided they want to make a career of it. So we hired on 5 people last week. And we're thinking that it's going to be a trend for, probably for years to come. So, yeah.
I think it's important to note too, that that's an industry problem.
Yeah.
Like Lane Transit District is having a terrible time, 8 years ago, they get 300 applications for 20 jobs, and now they're lucky if they get 25 for 20 jobs. So it's a big deal. And that's another one that spends a lot on training.
We, Shane helped us in, our negotiations, our labor negotiations this year to try and improve, what we're compensating to. And that's one of our tactics to try and keep people, on. And so.
Yeah, sorry. I noticed on page 121, it talked about subsurface repairs and the need for a subsurface construction crew. And on page 126, I noticed in terms of your FTE, your subsurface crew chief is going down from 3 to 1. But at the same time, your PW, which I presume is Public Works crew chief, is going up from 1 to 3. Is that just a kind of a change in names?
Survey. Subsurface, this one that's increasing.
I'm sorry?
Which one's increasing?
The PW crew chief. That was on page 125, actually.
Ryan, I can help with that.
Okay.
There's due to a restructuring, Brian mentioned going away from the apprenticeship program. The crew chief has a different classification rate of pay at the subsurface level because of certifications. And so what was once all the crew chiefs being considered equal across the board as far as that rate of pay is not the same anymore. That's why you have 1 and then 3. Okay. So they just kind of flipped.
Very good. Thank you.
Can I ask one kind of generic question, and certainly Public Works, but it's others. Most of the FTE, and I'm only harping in on the FTE because it's one of our big cost areas. There's a lot of like 0.21 or 0.25 of this. To what extent are we using part-time employees versus full-time employees or equivalents? And is there much of is there any operational savings that's worth it for more part-time employees? Because I know there's a lot of training, there's a lot of experience that goes into that. But I also know that perhaps, partially retired individuals, is there a cost savings to having more part-time employees within any of our departments?
When you're looking at the program budgets, especially with the apprenticeship program, it would look as though the FTE is fragmented. And so they'd work in a program area that might be a subsurface program area, and then work in a surface program area, but it's the same person.
Okay.
So It's still pertaining to your question, though. We do hire seasonal staff that comes on. In fact, Ben and Adam, they just completed recruitment, and we'll have how many employees coming on that are 11? So they are not part-time, but they're temporary employees that come on for approximately 3 to 4 months.
Great.
So we do utilize that to improve our effectiveness to get to some of that beautification and landscape work that's really we're able to in a summertime environment.
Sure. And is there a cost, I mean, relative cost savings for these seasonal employees as opposed to the full-time regular employees?
Yes, there is. They don't receive benefits.
Thank you.
They do have some benefits, but they're more minimal. And they are less skilled in terms of where we can utilize them, so. We have a pretty narrow framework for that.
Well, to that question, so is because there's, in public works, do people have, when you're at a certain certification, you can't easily be moved into different job assignments because you're overqualified or unqualified or union impacted? Is that part of the limitations?
Interesting question, because we're moving away from an apprenticeship, which basically was a generalistic way for us to be able to have people work in all of the program areas. But what we found out is that we lack proficiency and expertise in areas where, especially with equipment, but people can move. I mean, we have 75.96, I don't know what 0.96 staff is, but we have 75.96 staff, and you would think, boy, that sounds like a lot of, a lot of people. Of course, not all of those are in the field, yet we could use 50% more to address what, optimally, that's never going to occur. It doesn't occur for any other cities. And I think we do a really good job of prioritizing what our needs are, but they are able to cross. For example, when we had the ice storm, it was all hands on deck, and those kinds of things. And so, and that's, it can happen, with flooding as well. So. Yeah.
I'll get another question. So, in your presentation, you talked about the backlog on city streets, somewhere in the range, I think $60 to $100 million or something like that. So I'm curious, do you foresee, for example, the current bond with Mill Street and others, just with the reality of constrained resources, that's just kind of the strategy that we're going to maybe need to adopt going forward with some of those like larger collector arterial streets, just to really get those projects done, is to sort of get some special monies allocated for those. It just seems like that's kind of an eventuality that we may have to face, but I
The
think
continuation of bond projects.
yeah, just to like get those
Yeah.
major projects done, because they're not going to be able to cover it out of the general funds.
The nice thing, for me as a user of the system,
Right.
is that the bonds project approach with arterial collector system, you're advertising where the work's gonna be done.
Sure,
And so people, I think, lean to that, and, it's a popular approach. I'm not sure it would work in local residential areas where we have concerns. I want to speak real quickly to, we're throwing numbers around like 30 million, 60 million, 100 million.
Yeah.
I don't feel comfortable with that. In fact, I think it erodes the confidence of Nancy as a city manager and the mayor, you being able to tell the story. Ben and Chris Eitner, our GIS, Ben, our surface manager, and Chris Eitner, who is one of our GIS leads, did a presentation on information management systems with the council this last February. And we are on a track to have better, more updated, more technical, scientific estimates when it comes to those costs and what the backlogs are. That said, we have preservation backlogs. So work that can be done that isn't considered rehabilitation, and then we have rehabilitation backlogs. We sort of lump them not in the same boat. They're two different things.
Can I interject for just a moment? I just want to delineate a little bit of the conversation because I know that some of these questions do have a budgetary impact, but some of the opinions or responses really are rise to the level of policy, which would be with the elected officials. So I think our staff does a great job and I really appreciate, their earnestness, but so it's kind of it really is a policy, an elected official directive. So I just want to.
Thank you.
Risk of violating this. When Ken was talking about the levy project, he mentioned how much money the city had put aside for their eventual part of that. And just as a general question, how do you decide, and this is maybe is for Nathan, how do you decide we're gonna save for this project versus we're gonna issue revenue bonds? In other words, we're gonna generate the money now and pay it off over time versus we're gonna save money and do it in the future.
So I think the way I'd answer that is, when we look at our programs like sewer and drainage, where we have user fees that we can set for cost recovery and for planning for the future, that's not so much an issue. Where it's become challenging is as it relates to our street infrastructure. We used to receive a lot more dollars coming down from the federal government, from the state and from the county. Also, it goes back to just timber revenues. And now we're kind of at a point where we have the gas tax and, what funds we can secure from other agencies. So it's become a little more challenging. It does kind of stretch back into kind of a policy question. And it's something I think that will be debated probably in the coming years.
So the next order of business would be a 10-minute intermission. Do we want to take that or just keep going? Take it. Okay, 10 minutes. I'm gonna get used to it, right?
Your body should be, your head should be really much.
So the next item on the agenda is just continuation of deliberations. Are there any further questions, topics, or discussions regarding the proposed budget?
I had a question, but Nathan already answered.
We'll do sure.
Get extra points.
Nathan, do police department or fire department have any contracts with other entities? Like providing service in outlying districts or anything like that?
So the fire department does. We have Springfield, both Eugene and Springfield have fire service contracts with outlying districts. We have one with Willie Kinsey Fire District, Rainbow Fire District, and Glenwood Fire District. On the police side of things, I'm not aware of any.
Where does that revenue show up?
Shows up in the general fund.
Is that a charge for service?
Yep.
And then other question is, how do, as your cost increase, do you negotiate with those districts, or is there some kind of formula that, I mean, do they continue to share the same proportion of costs as our costs go up?
They share the same proportional cost. What we do is we take the AV for all three districts and ourselves, and then allocate out the full cost of fire and life safety services based on that percentage of AV.
Thanks.
I have a question about the police budget. It indicates that there's an expectation to spend about 566,000 on Cahoots, and my understanding is Cahoots is no longer in operation. Thank you. So I'm wondering what now.
So we had a separate contract. The city of Eugene had a contract with Cahoots and the city of Springfield had a contract with Cahoots. The city of Springfield's contract with Cahoots is still.
Oh, it is?
Yes.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think we could ask, any updates on the use of the jail? Are we being paid with contracts with other communities that's keeping us 100% whole, or are we seeing gaps?
As far as I know, and I can double check with Jessica back there, but we are renting the same number of beds to the outside agencies, and we anticipate that continuing.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had a question. I'm just trying to find it. Okay, just found it. On the budget specifically. So I just noticed that the capital outlay just dropped significantly going into 2026. So it was 600, 300, 700K, and then down to 71. So I'm just curious what led to that.
We purchased 10 vehicles last year and 1 vehicle this year. Yeah. Thank you.
Some time ago, the council approved money to buy a new van for Cahoots. Where is that going to end up?
That is our van. And that is our van. So it is our Cahoots van that you see driving around Springfield. So I think we lease it to them for like $1, but it's our van.
Thank you.
Is there any, I know cameras were a big topic in the past. Is there any slowdown that we're having to make as a result of just tightening budgets for fully equipping our officers with everything they need for transparency with the public, cameras, et
For
cetera?
body worn cameras and in video. Right now, that will be an expense that we're looking at, and we have actually requested some additional funding for that. They are coming up on kind of their end of life. And so in the next budget cycle, and for sure the one after that, we will be looking at trying to replace those. But right now, we do have enough to equip all of the officers with body worn cameras, and all the cars have in-car video.
Thank you.
On the budget side, having that full equipment and proper equipment, has that reduced our experience with lawsuits and those kind of court expenses against the department?
I don't know what it was historically. I know that we don't have a lot of pending lawsuits right now. I know that that's one of the things that not only does the community appreciate having, but the officers also appreciate having them, because I think we've seen maybe also a decrease in the number of complaints when people know that they're also on camera. And so if we can observe their behavior as well as officers' behaviors. So I think it's just been overall a benefit for everybody.
They have one buses too. It's a really good idea.
If there's no other business, I will adjourn the Springfield Budget Committee. Our next meeting will be held Wednesday, May 14th.